What you want in an office is you don't want to have to think about the office. And you have facial recognition to check you in and helps them have a really productive day. The number one expense for all companies are their employees. The last thing you want to do is spend your 15 minutes of a meeting trying to figure out the space. Things that we saw come out of this report is really a new role. How many of those gatherings are hybrid, had a back to office mandate, and they don't have enough seats? Maybe I shouldn't be booking a desk in the middle of the HR department. You walk the floors and you say, well, why is nobody using this? People want to come to the office when they're needed and their teams are there, trying to get to that Goldilocks zone. So the free food was great, but the amenities that we're seeing are actually connectivity to their coworkers. There's just no patience for having to use multiple systems. So it's really working with the technology providers to say, I want to be able to just ask my buildings the questions. I want to be able to talk to my buildings. And we're so close to that.
We all know the office is evolving. More people are returning, and the shift in how we are using the office is challenging leaders to manage space across an increasingly complex ecosystem of tools. It's no longer just about having the right data. It's about how you manage that data to drive value. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, where we explore the seismic shifts redefining how and where we work. We're unpacking how the modern work environment is being transformed. After years of downsizing, hybrid schedules, remote work, policy experiments, and trying to predict what's next, are we starting to see a full circle return to the office 5 days a week? In this episode, I'm joined by Meg Swanson, Chief Market Officer at Eptura, and we'll dig into Eptura's 2025 Workplace Index report based on data from their 25 million global users and unpack what it means for workplace and facility leaders navigating this new era. We'll explore shifting employee behavior, AI integration, real estate pressures, and what separates a high-performing productive work environment from a merely efficient one. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, founder of Work Design and an architect who spent years in the trenches of workplace strategy and office design. And now I'm excited to share insights from the brilliant minds who are transforming how and where we work. So if you're wondering how the office is transforming and how that might work, you're in the right place. We welcome you to join the conversation, so please like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Meg, welcome. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
I have too. Thanks for having me, Bob. It's really exciting to always talk about the shifts that we're seeing within the workplace.
Good. Well, let me ask you to start out. If you could share with us a little bit about your background and what you're currently working on at Eptura.
Happy to. So I've been in work design, the work area for the past 20 years. So I had the privilege of starting early on in my career at Steelcase. And Steelcase does such an amazing job about user-centered design and how we make sure the spaces work for individuals. And I was on the technology side in a division where we were creating interactive whiteboards and spaces that are really adaptive and shaping around the teams that are using them. And so being able to spend my career throughout tech, really looking at the entire built environment and how you make walking into an office, interacting as seamless as possible through technology. So it's been really exciting to see all the innovations and changes over a number of years within the corporate real estate environment.
Yeah, I can imagine you've seen a lot. Is there anything that stands out in your mind as being profound?
I think what we're seeing right now is technology being more seamless. And back when I was earlier on in this profession, we had a lot of having to teach people how to use the technology. We would even have movable furniture, and you would have to have a team that knew how to move it, and then they would have to teach the team that you could actually move and play with your space. And now everything over the years, everything's really been about how do we get user design within the software, within the spaces where you don't have to train people. It's just seamless. And it just happens on the back end. Like walking into the office and you have facial recognition to check you in, or you have a QR code that's in your wallet on your phone, and you scan in and it automatically sets you with your desk and your space, and so you just don't have to think about it. And so I think that for me has been the most exciting thing, is how do we take the things that we used to have to do heavy training on, and then watching how the generation coming into the workforce now, it's just behind the scenes, seamless, and helps them just have a really productive day.
That's great. I'm excited to get into your report. I think there's a lot there. I mean, I'm curious what motivated you guys to prepare the report?
We've got the privilege of having 25 million users of our software. So we see the data of people coming into the office, how they use space, the utilization of their workspace. And then the reason we do the report once a year is also kind of just getting that benchmarking data on, beyond the usage of the space, what are people looking to do strategically. And one of the exciting things that we saw come out of this report is really a new role that we're seeing come up more and more, and that's the workplace experience leader. So we've got nearly 70% of companies are naming someone or creating a role around leading the physical office and workplace experience, which is, sometimes they're coming from facility management, sometimes they're coming from HR, but just that focus that we need a named leader in this space has been something that we've seen really 2023, starting really growing, throughout 2024. So it's just those moments where you can ask the questions, get feedback, across the globe, and then really look at the differences between Asia Pacific and Europe and North America, so we can just help inform our customers and then, the industry as a whole as to what's going on.
I'm curious, you talk about experience, and I think that's something that comes up a lot in the conversation as we're thinking about space. And I'm wondering if you can define for us what an experience is or what that means, for somebody that's in an office.
What you want in an office is, you don't want to have to think about the office. So it's kind of like Fight Club. We don't talk about Fight Club, with the office. You don't talk about what you have to do to be in the office. And that means creating ways that when you need something, it's there. And that puts a lot of pressure on the teams that are normally behind the scenes, with the architectural team and the facility management team and the designers, is they've got to understand how their space is being used today, how their space will be used moving forward, and then how do they make sure they have those moments and environments that people need. So great examples of this are, we would see a lot of individual desk bookings, maybe prior to 2020. And now, post 2022 and onwards, you see people are coming into the office, less for individual work and more for gathering. And so as a designer and designing spaces and managing the facilities, you've got to think about, what's my current configuration? How do I create those coffee house type collaborative spaces? How do I take my conference rooms and understand what are the size of the gatherings that are happening? How many of those gatherings are hybrid, where it's, 4 people in the office, 6 remote? Do I have the right technology in that room? If somebody books that room, how do they make sure they can have the right room with the right technology? Because the last thing you want to do is spend your 15 minutes of a meeting trying to figure out the space. And so that's really, when we talk about the experience, it's making it seamless, making things there when you need them, and that takes the teams really understanding the data, not just point in time, but constant, because it's constantly changing, it's seasonal, reflective on what's happening within that corporation or enterprise, what they're looking to do at the moment.
And I would imagine from what you just described that there was a huge social component to that, to people coming into the office, and that's a big part of the experience.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there have been mandates of returning to office, but what we find works really well is people want to come to the office when they're needed and their teams are there. Looking at is deploying technology that says, Meg, you look like you're working from home today, but you need to meet with Bob. Bob's in the office. You need to meet with Sharon. Sharon's in the office. And so give me a push notification the day before saying, hey, we see your schedule's working from home, but the vast majority of the people you're meeting with are going to be in the office. So how about we book your parking space in the car park? We book your locker for you. We book your desk. And by the way, we're going to book your desk near where the other people in the office are. So that way, that experience is I walk in, I know I'm in close proximity or on the same floor as, the people I'm going to be meeting with. So I'm not spending 20 minutes out of my day wayfinding around an office, pinging people going, oh, where are you? I'm by the plant. Which plant? Which section are you at? So really looking at how do you have those nudges? How do you have all your technology tied together, which is a big challenge for companies right now. An average across the average organization, they're using 17 different solutions. And when it comes to what I would experience as an employee coming in, different disparate technologies, some of them it's upwards of 40. And so what we're really looking across the industry is how do we help that? How do we get the data pulled together from those solutions, get those integrated into more of a holistic platform so that you can have that smooth experience and employee journey. I mean, on average, these larger organizations, they have, 11 plus people that are just pulling the data on what's happening. And so that's a big push for the industry right now is how do we make the data accessible? How do we push those integrations so you don't have all of these individual point technologies, but you've got everything in a, woven mesh that can make it, more of a seamless experience.
You mentioned the different types of platforms, the 17 to 40 different types of, I guess, information that people are tracking. Can you give us some examples of what those might be?
Yeah, and it's if you're an organization that's managing multiple offices in multiple countries, you're going to find think about every point along your journey in the day. So, how do you find your parking space? Is that space bookable? Are there enough spaces? Do they have red green lights, in the car park that tells you, okay, that one's available? Down to I get the return style or I get access. So, do I have a physical key card? Do I have a QR code? Is it, biometric scanning me in? I've got my elevator banks to get to the right floor. What floors do I have access to from a security standpoint? What desks am I available to book? Because maybe I shouldn't be booking a desk in the middle of the HR department, right? Maybe with what I do, and maybe as a designer, I need a high visibility monitor and I need a sit stand desk. And so all of that data on what assets are in the building so that as an end user, I can get the right space down to the meeting room booking technology. Let's say I need catering. Let's say I need amenities for my team because they need to get their dry cleaning done. They need to, order it, food for a team meeting, have alert for a happy hour, all the way to exiting. And then does the organization know where I am during the day if there's an emergency? So if there's an emergency in the building, is that syncing to my mobile app or where I'm at to say it's an emergency or it's a planned drill? Here's how you need to exit and here's how you need to check in to make sure you're safe. So it's just really mapping out across that journey. And so you can see how you've got multiple technologies that are coming to play there. And that's why that workplace experience leader is the one, or whoever's, really looking at that, they're looking across all of it and saying, all right, where can I have the data flowing? Where can I have these points so that coming into the office is completely seamless and frictionless for the end employee?
That's a lot of data that I guess you have to track.
It is.
You mentioned, we talked about experience as something that came out of the report, and I was wondering if there's anything else in the results that you got back that surprised you.
We are seeing an increasing number of companies saying they're going to increase their number of days in the office. And we've been seeing that since 2022. So the difference between 2023 and 2024 is 34% of companies that we surveyed globally are increasing their number of days in the office. And what we're seeing is, what everyone's hearing about and seeing in the news as well, is it's that midweek peak. So it's that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So what we're working with organizations across the globe on is, how do you smooth out that peak? Because imagine if you have a workplace that can comfortably seat, 1,000 employees, because maybe during 2020 and 2021, you let go of some real estate and you have 2,000 employees in that area, and they, are now going to be coming back to an office environment, and you can't, it doesn't make sense to staff a whole facility for that midweek peak, that Wednesday. And so how do you have, different teams on different days? So how do you say, listen, you're a Monday, Tuesday group, you're a, Wednesday, Thursday group. And so really, and that's why you said there, you mentioned there's a lot of data. There is, but it's also exciting because it gives that confidence to the teams planning to be able to say, okay, here are the teams that we know that work together. Therefore, we're going to talk to them about doing a Monday, Tuesday grouping, or they're going to be the first week of the month, then they're remote, then they're on the third week of the month. So there's shift and hourly booking where teams are doing morning shifts, afternoon shifts. There's balancing weeks. So you've got some groups that are, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks remote. And then you're just really looking at how you can be flexible with your space, because with the number of people going back, most organizations are not going to set up their environment for that peak demand, because on Fridays it's empty. And then that's also coordination of great day to get repairs done, right? So let's get the facility teams in there. Let's get all the contractors in there to make sure that, all the updates, heavy cleanings are happening. So it's just this orchestration of scheduling, knowing when people are in, kind of load balancing and scheduling across so that they have a great experience, but then you're also being really mindful of the capital expenditures for the organization.
You mentioned we're seeing more people come back to the office. And yeah, I guess, are we seeing it like 4 to 5 days a week? And what's driving that shift?
Yeah, what we're seeing in return to office is about 3 days a week, so three plus. And the interesting thing is the volume of visitors have doubled since, kind of pre-2020 numbers, and just year over year, we're continuing to see visitors increase. And the reason for that is not all organizations have physical offices to come to. And so we had a client that is a consulting firm, and pre 2020, the activities that happened in their office were the high-end client meetings. And so it was very high touch, high-end client meetings, because all of their consultants were out in the field with their clients. And so they didn't have a huge need for, a corporate headquarters other than their large strategic meetings. Then you fast forward to 2022, that organization are the ones in the office. And so all the clients are coming to them. And so we've seen these shifts with, where you have in-person experiences, a lot in the financial services, legal, where you want to make sure you have that face-to-face interaction, a lot of tech companies. And so their number of visitors are increasing because they're the ones that are the place to go to. And so they've got to make sure they've got secure visitor solutions, because you can imagine having that shift. You don't want someone coming into an office and having, free reign to go to any floor they want, access anything they want. So you've got to make sure that, from a security, from a policy standpoint, you've got good organization of understanding who's in your building, where they are at a certain time as you've increased the number of visitors. So that's been a really interesting one that we've seen is, across the board, just an increase in people visiting.
I'm curious, can you see in your data whether organizations are taking more space or less space?
It's a mix of both, and it really depends on what they did, the decisions that were made in 2020 and 2021. So you have some companies held their real estate portfolios and are now looking at the data of occupancy and figuring out, where they have the right balance. Across the board, we see around 36% of our respondents said optimizing their real estate is the number one thing. So exactly to your point. And then some had reduced the volume of real estate. Now maybe they've had a back to office mandate and they don't have enough seats. And so they're looking at how do we spill over into, shared co-working spaces on certain days. And then, from a technology standpoint, what does that experience look like? Because that's an extension of your brand. And how do you have one mobile app for the employee to use and they can book your office or overflow offices. And so it's been really interesting to see the balance of some are reducing their footprint, some are increasing, and it really the common denominator are the decisions that were made around their real estate portfolio earlier on. And then the ultimate area we want to look at is, do they have visibility to how their spaces are being used? Because we know the number one expense for all companies are their employees. And then the number two, close behind it, is their real estate and their commercial offices. So it's a large focus on the balance sheet. It affects employees and their experience, which affects your number one priority. And so we're really seeing companies trying to get to that Goldilocks zone of, I don't have too much space, I don't have too little, I've got like that just right fit for the teams. And so that's really where having the right data comes into play, because then you can go back to a board and say, we need to increase based on the past 12 months of being at capacity, or we need to take these floors. So we have, 12 floors. We really only need 7, right? So we can take these extra floors and sublease, or we have a great organization in London. They're a bank and they offer floors that they're not using. They've redesigned those to be these incubator innovation centers for startups that are part of their community. So as being, a member with this organization, you get access to book space in their startup community. So they've taken empty real estate and turned it into an incredible value to their overall company and made it another asset. So it's just, once you understand your space, I think then it's exciting on the strategic decisions that they can make with it.
Yeah, I'm curious, following up on that, do you see different types of amenities increasing or decreasing depending on what the organization or how they're using that space?
Yeah, the big discussion in 2021 and 2022 was always, free food gets people back to the office and just go coffee and food. The discussions that we're having, really seeing 2024 and now, is uh, the proximity to the teams they work with. And so the free food was great, still continues to be a great perk, but it's really about, am I coming into the office because today I'm going to be meeting with people and having that in-office experience. So the amenities that we're seeing are more around, we call them kind of the concierge experiences. So how do you alert the teams that there are going to be networking sessions and that there are more amenities that are helping them, you know, be at the office longer, whether that's dry cleaning pickup, more things that are kind of offsetting things they would have to do at home. And so the amenities that we're seeing are actually connectivity to their coworkers and visibility to, here's who's in, here's the times that they're going to be in. And then, on top of that, you want to make sure it's seamless, and you want to make sure it's a smooth environment to go into, and there's not a lot of friction.
Is there anything that stands out as a significant attraction to the office now?
Yeah, the thing that we're seeing stand out is it is that the space works for the team and it's inspiring. And that means having the kind of touchdown collaborative spaces, having the conference rooms to the right size that you need. And so it's really that fit for purpose that we're seeing. And there are definitely companies that have incredible perks. We have one that they have an indoor golf simulator for the teams. We have one that has a hidden speakeasy for their teams. And it's also depending on the generations that they're supporting. So I know on your broadcast, you've had experts on talking through that today we're managing 6 generations of the workforce, and we are. And Gen Z is, steadily growing. It just overtook baby boomers last year as, a larger percentage in the office. And they're projected to be, 27, 30% of the workforce over the next year. And you've got to imagine the expectations for a Gen Z worker is a little different when it comes to the seamlessness of an office. So when I come into an office, I'm okay to, maybe I'll forgive, like I've got to have a badge, I've got to have certain things because that's been, my whole career. But somebody coming in new, they expect it to be as seamless as Apple paying at the coffee shop and I'm walking onto a plane with, Face ID. And so you've got this generation coming in that are not expecting to have friction. They're expecting things to be completely seamless for them, and they're expecting to have AI built in. So of our survey respondents, 77% said we are implementing AI. And now the use cases that we're seeing for that are, the facial recognition, we're absolutely seeing implementation of that, but it's more understanding the worker and recommending spaces for them. So understanding that I'm in, maybe executive meetings during the day. And so I'm going to need to have my catering and I'm going to need to have these spaces booked versus, if I'm coming in and I'm having a design day, I'm going to need the flip charts and the creative space and this setup for me. So it's that, deploying technology that's going to understand the individual and their needs and making sure that when they come in, that space is available for them, whether it's their preference for a walking desk. We've seen a high volume of requests for, walking desks and facilities and a high increase for having those neurodiversity requirements thought of. Like, do people need quiet spaces? Do people need more collaborative spaces? And how do you meet them all and provide all of those spaces to make sure that you're hitting the needs of the workforce?
Can you see in the data, changing employee behavior and expectations, and what does that look like?
We are seeing in the volume of requests that are coming in. And it really comes back to the expectation that the company understands me as an employee and understands you as an employee and your needs. And the requests that we see coming in are really around more seamless technology. Give me one mobile app to use, give me one consolidated access. There's just no patience for having to use multiple systems at the end user level. And so that's what facility managers, people working on the digital employee experience, HR, and that's what they're working through right now is how do you bridge from the today state of disparate systems that were brought in at multiple times, multiple years over that building, maybe 20 years old, that building, the other building in your portfolio is 1 year old. And so you've got different technologies in those. And so how do you, create the roadmap of how do I bring everything to where it'll all be integrated into a single system where in the palm of their hand, we hear this all the time, just in their app, in the palm of their hand, we want them to have access to everything from the second they leave their house to the second they return, back at their home. Even updates on weather alerts on there's, weather's a little rough today. Maybe today's, you take this tube route or you take this different traffic route, making sure that it's just being that single communication source to keep employees, up to speed and performing at their best.
Yeah, I got to think facility managers and, workplace practitioners are seeing a huge change with all of this new technology that's coming into the workforce. What kinds of challenges are emerging that they're having to deal with?
Yeah, it's interesting. And yesterday I was spent a few days at a facility management conference talking through this and talking through the digital thread. And this is where I think there's a great role for architects and designers to bring the facility team to the table. Because when you're designing a new space, it's so powerful to understand how that space has been used and understand how that space is going to be maintained over time. And you've got that thread of, we call it AECO. And so architects, engineering, construction, operations, right? So you've got the facility teams at the operations, you've got the architectural teams designing, and sometimes there's a gap between construction or renovation to operations. And so the more the teams at the front end can connect with the facility managers and just smooth out this digital thread. One of the challenges that we have is, as a building's designed, the facility managers increasingly have the need to have a digital twin of that building. So meaning they have their physical floor plans of the building, but then they have a digital model that they can share with anyone who needs it, whether it's emergency services or renovation, construction. And those two need to be up to date all the time. So the digital twin is the digital version of the physical floor plan, right? And so sometimes a digital twin will be developed by an architectural firm, but they never ask the facility team, well, what software do you use? How are you going to use this? So the architectural team will hand over a digital twin that nobody can use. And the facility team is, well, goodness, if you just brought me to the table, I could have let here's the model that I use. And it could have been this beautiful collaborative experience. And so I think for anyone in the design aspects, looking around the room and asking for everyone who's on their client space, does anybody manage the facility that's in this room? 50% of the time, there's probably going to be silence, right? And so saying, okay, can we get that facility manager or facility lead at the table? And just even having a phone call of, walk me through how you manage the facility, walk me through the tech that you use, because there's such innovation happening in architectural design with being able to design in virtual reality and being able to do walkthroughs, and it's amazing all the work that's happening. And then the facility teams are going to inherit that to maintain and run over time. And so the more you can have those two connected, just it helps everyone, because then you've got the architects are excited because everything that they designed and built, nothing was changed, right? I mean, it's living, it's breathing, it's has a legacy, and it's running within the facility. That would be the challenge that I see for facility managers right now, is they're having to modernize their existing environments, but then a lot of the times they're not at the seat of the table. And so they've got a little bit of a challenge ahead of them.
Can you distinguish for us maybe the difference between a high performing work environment, that supports people from a purely optimized piece of real estate?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the teams, sometimes you can, if you don't have the data, sometimes the optimized environment that looked great on paper is, you walk the floors and you say, well, why is nobody using this? Why is no one here? And then you go around the corner and you grab a cup of coffee and you see all your employees at the coffee shop. You're like, well, I'm paying for you to be here, not at the coffee shop. And so I think the environments that we see working the best are the ones that are looking at how employees are using the space today. So before you embark on a renovation project or embark on new construction, it's so important to get a sense of, how are the teams using the space today, and if they're not using it, and really observing what they're doing. And you talked a bit about surveys, and are surveys effective or not, and I think it's really observation. So where are teams getting together? When are they getting together? What generations do you have coming in? What generations do you need learning from each other? And then using that as a way to inform the models. Because sometimes when they're produced just simply on, here's the latest industry standard, here's the latest Hive configuration, and you haven't physically sat anyone in that in that setup, that's where we see lots of money spent on these environments and they're just unused and they need to be reconfigured. So I think say listening and getting the data ahead of time is the difference that we see when we come in to reconfigure an employee experience or look at space utilization. 9 times out of 10, it's because the space isn't being utilized and there was a large investment in it. And so they're trying to figure out, why, what can we do to optimize it?
Well, no, I think for years we were driven by square footage per person,
Yes.
maximizing the cost and efficiency of how a space worked. And now today, I feel like that is it's completely out the window. It doesn't really work anymore. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what are the new metrics now people are looking at in terms of driving a high productive work environment?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's definitely still an aspect to from a financial standpoint, you still need to look at that, right? But is that the metric? I get a metric. And so we really look at the working space to employee ratio, the desk to person ratio. So are there for every 7 people, is it one desk? Because not everyone's going to be coming in, they're not coming in at the same day. Or is that ratio more 4 to 1, 4 people to one? And I say desk, but what we really mean is working space. Because sometimes people come in and they are individual workers and they work at a desk, and that's great. Sometimes people come in and they are purely collaborative and they just want a hotel. They're going to be in the conference rooms all day long, or sometimes they are in a lab environment and that's what you need. So whatever that workspace is, figuring out what we see is the ratio of how many team members do I have that are available to reserve that space versus how many of those spaces exist, and just balancing that ratio from a financial perspective, because everyone running a facility would love to just have endless space. But the practicality of it is, there is a budget and you have to make sure you're creating the right environment. So we see that metric coming forward quite a bit is the workspace to people ratio, and how do we have that balance. The other is the proximity of teams that work together often. So is the HR's hiring strategy where they are co-located in a certain area, or are they distributed? And then how are they, from a career perspective, when do you want those teams in the office? Because sometimes you'll have individual workers and their team may be global. And so, the answer is, well, I can just work from home because I'm on a virtual call all day long. But the reality of that is that's where we see a lot of employee turnover, because it's really hard to build culture. And it's really also difficult from a career standpoint of, personally for me, being around leaders, seeing how they interacted, being the one in the office, grabbing the cup of coffee with someone who was not in my area, and then they know me, right? Because it is still very much a people do promote and gravitate towards known, trusted entities. And so even if someone is a remote worker, it is important for them to build those connections and build that trust. I mean, we know the way to do that is to do it in person. It doesn't need to be 5 days a week, but it can be, once a quarter in for a strategic meeting or mentoring meetings, or just setting up those points. We really look at the volume of people per space and then the connectivity points between people.
I think there's a lot of organizations that are still carrying legacy real estate footprints in this period of time. I think it's probably about 60% of leases have turned since the pandemic. And I'm curious what the report reveals about that. What strategies or tools are proving effective right now for those environments?
Yeah, and it's really comes down to the occupancy. And I mentioned earlier that, 36, 40% are looking to optimize their real estate. So they're continuing to work towards that. So we definitely see that coming through. We see an increase in search volume for space optimization. That's really been absolutely within 2025. and it is any country, regardless of the country, we're seeing that look is how do you, or that search volume of how do you make sure that for the real estate you have a good, keen understanding of how it's being used so that you can go back on your capital plan that's going to last, 5, 10 years, and say, based on today's occupancy, we need this many fewer floors, we need this many more floors, and balancing that across. And so a lot of times what we see from in the reports is when people are looking at their global portfolio, they're they're usually maintaining the same level of real estate globally, but they're maybe reducing in one country, increasing in another. And so that's that coordination as well of looking at am I going to be expanding my footprint and where am I going to be reducing, and making sure that they're balancing that with the leases that are expiring, and I'm getting a good sense of that. Number of companies are also, deploying AI to look at the leases across their portfolio, and to use all of that as planning tools in their long-term capital plans. Is take a look at my occupancy data, take a look at the leases that I have, and then start drawing out, my multi-year plan to optimize that space, expand that space, or reduce that space in favor for expansion maybe in another city or another country.
You mentioned AI before, and even in terms of lease review, and I think it's becoming pervasive. I'm curious, particularly around the employee experience. It sounds like things are getting much more personalized and individualized. And so I'm curious, what does AI look like in that context, and how are people using that?
Yeah, in the context of personalization, I think what AI is causing for all of us is the desire to search for things in natural language. So I just want to ask. I don't want to have to navigate an app. I just want to ask, And if you're running a facility, you just want to be able to ask an interface, how many people are in my office at this given time? What are my peak occupancy days? And it's funny because we've talked with clients, and with AI, I asked, well, do you still need dashboards, or are you just going to query a natural language? And I was assured, no, 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 we still need dashboards. We still need that level of data. But yeah, we want to be able to also just ask the questions, the strategic questions of it. So it's really important that companies are creating that corpus or that repository of the right data that then they can query and ask the questions against. Because a lot of times what we're so familiar with right now is the commercial AI, regardless of which one you're using, and it's pulling from all the public data. And with most organizations, they should not have their floor plans, their occupancy, their employees anywhere in a public space. And so that has to be behind their firewalls, protected, secured within the technology providers they're using. So it's really working with the technology providers to say, I want to be able to just ask my buildings the questions. I want to be able to talk to my buildings, and we're so close to that. And it really is working with the CIO's office, the IT organization, to make sure the right data is set up and flowing in from all these systems where you can ask those questions. And I remember back in 2005, I think we were having a workshop on, I just want to talk to my buildings. And that's what's exciting is, back then it was more of a future state. And now we're within a couple years. And in some countries, we're there where you can ask that data, and then have the systems be responsive to that, where it knows if you ask a question, the blinds close depending on the time of day, and you can really talk and orchestrate the building. Because a lot of what companies are looking at is how do you move closer towards automation. You never want it fully automated. We always want humans, to create the experience. But if you can take those mundane tasks and get the information faster so we can make decisions, that's what's really powerful. So the overarching thing that we're hearing from AI is, yes, there's a lot of, kind of science projects that are wanted, but at the end of the day, I just want to ask a question and get an answer. and not have to pour through a lot of data to do that.
You mentioned earlier that the number of visitors coming into the workplace was increasing. And I'm curious, how are organizations rethinking space utilization and the overall workplace experience for those that are visiting that work environment?
Yeah, it's really around visibility to where those users are because the or those visitors are because you even today you can walk into large organizations and in their lobby there might still be a printed sign-in sheet, and that's not very secure. And if I sign in, you have no idea where I am in the building, and if something happens, you don't know if I'm in the building or not at that point. So there's with the increase in visitors, it's increased the need for organizations to make sure that they are just like they're accountable and responsible for their employees. The same holds true for their visitors, and really raising the level of the visitor to the employee and making sure it's a smooth experience. If you come to an organization for a meeting, that's your first impression with that brand. And if your first impression is, I've got to fumble around and find my ID, and I've got to look through a bunch of NDAs to sign, and it takes me 30 minutes to to just check in for a meeting. Well, now I'm 15 minutes late for my meeting because I got there 15 minutes ahead of time, right? And it's just not setting up for success. And so for visitor management, it's really the pre-booking, just like you have with a doctor's appointment, right? You pre-sign all your forms ahead of time, and then ahead of that, you can also take a picture of yourself, submit that, and so they can do a check of, okay, this is really the person. You can upload your ID to it. And so it's just really creating that smooth experience on check-in where I show up, I've got my QR code to scan, or I do a facial scan, it matches, it says yes, Meg has all her information that she's put in, and then they've got my cell phone number and my access. So if they need to update me or reach me or locate me throughout the day, they know how to. And so that's really been the difference that we've seen with the increase is the need to have as much fidelity on the location and the safety and the access of those visitors as you do for end employees.
You talked about integrating multiple workplace and building technologies being a major concern. And I'm just wondering how leaders can streamline that technology without overwhelming their teams, because I just feel like there's this proliferation of apps and technologies that are out there. And, I'm curious, how do you manage all of that?
Yeah, and I think the answer is you need to always make sure IT's at the table. Just like if you're, at the upfront design part, we want the facility team there. If you're looking at new technology, the IT team has to be there because they're looking just like the facility team has to manage the facility. The IT team ultimately inherits the shadow grown application or the app that was purchased and run for a single department. So it's really looking for that integration, and then asking vendors on, there are standard systems that are common for all companies, and maybe it's the HR information system, right? The record of all the employees and their access. Maybe it's the physical floor plans, so are those digitized? And maybe it's how employees are communicating, and then any other system you're adding, you have these home systems, and you've got to make sure the question is, how do you integrate with what I have today? And that needs to be the first question that's asked and that's kind of why you want IT there is you want to have an understanding of what should I be, centering to, and then how does that work with what I have today? And then if companies, what we also saw, really 2 years ago, and we're seeing it unwind a little bit now, is organizations created their own employee experience mobile application to, maybe book their desks or check in. And that's a significant staff that is running that. It looks great in the demo, but now you've got to have your software company now because now you're running software that's integrating with catering and integrating with everything. So I'd say what we're seeing right now is some of these homegrown solutions need to be looked at from a, is there a provider out there that can provide this versus us doing it in-house. And so we're seeing a shift in that of great things that were built. But over time, is that where that company wants to focus? Is running their own software internally, or do they want to have an organization run that for them and then give the requirements of what their teams need? So that's really the integration is if you're off purchasing something and you haven't connected with IT and you're not sure if it integrates with anything, that's a moment that you should pause and maybe bring somebody else in across the organization.
I'm curious, can we look at space and will the AI give us a qualitative review of what that space is? So if I say I'm looking for a space that has a view or a space that has certain acoustical qualities or certain types of chairs, will the technology be able to discern that?
Yeah, I think it's a great use case. And because you have, as an organization or as you're designing, you have elements you want to include. And, whether it's biophilia, where you want to make sure you've got, plants and the air quality. So you want to make sure you've got the right, HVAC system and cooling. And so there's this, massive checklist, right, that you have throughout, as you're designing these spaces. And then I think it's a great application of then putting in here's my requirements, here's what I'm delivering, right? And let's maybe, rate the spaces. And then that, creates that, game plan or roadmap moving forward to make sure it's a great environment. Because there was a really nice quote from a recent publication, and the quote was that facility managers or building operators have a larger impact on an employee's health than their doctor does. Because you think about the volume of hours that if you're an office worker, you're spending in an office and you're breathing in the air and you're, experiencing the environment and that's a huge impact on your well-being. How many steps are you taking? What amenities are there available for you, in a day? So it's a really important responsibility that we all have within the workspace, is not simply the design, not the technology, but just the holistic, like what is my impact on everyone who's walking through those doors every day, and how do we make sure that we're setting, them up in an environment that's going to be, mentally conducive for them, physically conducive for them, and frictionless from a that it's not causing stress from a, technology standpoint.
So I'm curious, having talked about all these different topics, if I'm a facility manager or a corporate real estate executive and I'm about to begin rethinking our current work environment, where would I begin or what suggestions would you have or, how would you suggest that we kind of move forward?
Yeah, I think the first place to get started is making sure that you've got the data on how it's being used today. And, whether that's technology or manual, but making sure you've got a really good baseline, because without that, all of a sudden the list of requirements from everyone will start to grow. And if you don't have that core foundation of here's what we have today, you don't have anything to tie back to. And so you'll start to see everything waver, and then by the time you deliver the project, it might be so far off from center where you wanted it. And so just always grounding on here's how we're using it today, here are the things that maybe we want to change on that. And then just always reminding, bringing everybody back to that. And part of that is the technology we're using today, the generations we have in the workforce, today and within the HR plans for the future, and, the physical spaces and how they're being used today. And just kind of triangulating all of that, and then always bringing the plan back to, okay, with those changes, does that improve, increase or decrease the quality that we currently have?
Yeah, I'm thinking back that we used to start projects by saying, what are your requirements? And now I think we have to dive much deeper into health and well-being aspects and the technology that goes into a space. And, I'm just wondering how, like, the consultants who are involved in the project begin to collect that data about a specific client.
Yeah, and it goes down to the technology that they have within the space, and you can set up quick ways to gather it. So you can, track the people coming in from a badging system. You can track if they're using a room booking or desk booking system. One thing that we have is there are QR codes on all the desks, and so in the mobile app, you check in to your desk just like you would, read a menu at a restaurant. And so that gives you very real time data, because it's not just I booked my desk for the next couple months and I'm never going to show up. I mean, I have to physically say I'm in. So the usage data connected with, our people's laptops, you're connecting into the Wi-Fi. And so you can start triangulating on who's in the space, how are they using the individual versus the group space pretty easily today with all the technology. It's just a matter of being able to pull that together into insights that then you can give back to the business. And then the beautiful part about that is I love data and love watching changes over time, because you can see it as that's growing, right? Are more people booking their spaces, or less? Okay, well, what change did we do to impact that? Oh, well, we created more of these touchdown collaborative spaces and everybody gravitated towards those. Oh, let's take a look at those. Why are those different, right? Do we need to make those changes? So it's just this ever growing, ever learning, evolving process. And at Eptura, one of our core values is be curious. And it's just that, just always be curious, always ask the questions and be curious about the data and what are the changes over time. And it's one of the reasons why we do the reports is everyone always wants to know what everyone else is doing. And that's important, but it's like more important to know what you're doing, because sometimes what works for another organization is not going to be the right fit for purpose for yours.
We've covered a lot in this conversation, and I'm curious if there's anything that we've left out that you think is important to convey to our listeners.
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think if I could leave with three things, the most important thing would be look at who's at the table making the decisions. And do you have somebody there who is running facilities and is going to inherit this design that you're working on? So the second is making sure you've got the data on the space and how that affects employees, and making sure that you're using that data to drive it. And then third is not forgetting about the technology, and making sure that anything that is set up is embedded and woven into a seamless technology experience to drive adoption. So, and that's really from, Eptura. Our company was built on, the name means it's the epicenter of the future at work, Eptura. So epicenter and future. And it's just that grounding of where are you at today? What's your data? What's your people? How is everything working? And then where's the future going? And then how do you make sure that you're setting, whether it's a project that you're consulting on, or your day-to-day operations, how are you setting your organization up for the future? And so I think when you keep those two things in mind, of the epicenter of the data of where we're at today and the right people, and then setting that mission and vision of where you're going, I think they'll always going to find success.
It sounds like you've got a lot of exciting things going on at Tora, and I know you're busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. I think there have been a lot of exciting things that we've covered, so thank you very much.
I appreciate the time. It's great to talk with you, and thank you for pulling together all the data for the industry, because there's so much change, and it's just so important what you're doing to keep everyone on the latest and greatest. So appreciate it.